Today, I am excited to welcome Justin Janoska. He's a clinician and the founder of the Autoimmune Revolution, where he guides women in their healing journey to reverse their autoimmune diseases and reproductive disorder naturally. He holds a master's in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport, and he has a very different and unique approach that emphasizes mind-body medicine. Justin is deeply committed and on a mission to help revolutionize how we address and heal women who are struggling with their autoimmunity. Justin, I'm honored to have you here. How are you doing today?
Doing quite well. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. So, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about you and what opened you up to, what you're doing today.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of times I get this question of, well, why are you this guy that works with women with autoimmune disease? And it's a really valid question. So to kind of elaborate on that, the reason why I do this is simply because of my mom and her Hashimoto's, her autoimmune disease. And when I started going to graduate school back in 2013-ish, I had this intention of studying alternative medicine for cancer. That was my passion. But then my mom got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I was like, what is this? What's going on? And then I found real quickly how much she needed help and wasn't getting it with conventional medicine. So that was the turning point for me. And I decided to investigate that further and learn more about that disease and autoimmunity as a whole. And I was kind of blown away by how much was being forgotten and ignored, or just a lot of women just not getting the proper truthful evidence and things that they need to get in remission. So that's what started. That was the impetus for the autoimmune revolution in my company. So because I see now, and more so than ever, the rate of autoimmunity is just multiplied. And I think it's probably somewhere between 2 to 7, 8% annually. The incidence is just climbing. So it's a serious deal. And so that's why I realized this is more of an area that needs to be addressed. And that was the whole starting point for me. So yeah, I love what I do and I love helping women, but there's a lot of people that need help. So it's a real honor for me to be on here and to share my story and what I've done and to help more with autoimmune disease like MS.
Would you share with us a little bit about what you found during the process with your mother and during your studying time?
Yeah, I mean, what I found was that she was getting the basic surface level treatment, as I call it, with drugs and medications, thyroid replacement. And that's not wrong, of course, right? And I'm not anti-pharmaceuticals or drugs, but that was just not enough, right? And of course, these endocrinologists, they have they're trained a certain way. They only know how to do certain things, which is addressing symptoms. So that made sense. And then we got her exploring the naturopathic alternative medicine side. And that was a lot of sort of the same thing, as I kind of put it. It's a lot of diet changes, supplements, detoxification, things like that. But they're just like the healthier versions of Band-Aids, in my opinion. And so that was helpful to a degree, but didn't really get her very far. And that's usually where a lot of people stop. Whether you have MS or any disease, actually, it's often what I find is they kind of doctor hop and they go through the gauntlet with different specialists, and they kind of are in the same position. So then I started thinking, okay, well, like, what's going on? What are we missing here? And eventually it clicked, and I could see that, okay, yes, there is a whole history of her life and all these components of her past that have not been addressed. And I'll talk more about this, I think, in a bit, but this is really what was not covered. And so, yes, there of course are lifestyle triggers and affections and sensitivities and things like that had a role in her disease in the onset, and also the progression of it that was being ignored as well. But there's a whole mental psychological element to this that was really what stood out the most, and no one had addressed that for her. My mom is a very deep history of pain and trauma and emotions and stress. Even since I was born, and a lot of women I work with are stressed currently for obvious reasons, but also from the past, and that bleeds and it feeds into the physiology of the body, and so that made sense, and that's why she was sick for over 20 decades. 2 decades, not 20 decades, and so that was pretty eye-opening for me. And I also realized that, like she had migraines for 20 years, at least longer than that. And no one could figure out why. All these neurologists she saw couldn't figure it out. And I know deep down that it was definitely an autoimmune related problem. And a lot of people have brain autoimmunity, don't even realize it. Not even talking about MS, but this is something that I believe that she was dealing with. I don't have evidence for it, but it's a common thing. And I bet you if we could find that. So all to say that she's not dealing with migraines anymore. She's not on pain meds or any of that stuff. So this autoimmune disease really had a huge, had a role. It had a big impact on her life and her health. So she's in a good place now, but it's definitely a work in progress for sure. So.
Well, that's pretty amazing though. I remember that when we first talked and you shared the story with me, you said that she was going to so many doctors and she was getting so many different treatments. And then each treatment was really supposed to cure one symptom. And then so she was getting so many things, but it was not a treatment for the cause.
Yes. Yeah.
And the difference, like what you just shared with us, started when you started implementing your method or your strategies. Mm-hmm. So you touched a little bit now about past. Can you tell us more about it? What is the complete strategy and how you really support women in reversing their autoimmune disease?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I mean, there's a lot to it, of course. But the first thing that we want to do is, at least for me, and what I found is most helpful, is to explore one's story and their history and their biography, right? Your disease, it tells you a story not just about your cells and your body, but of yourself, if you listen. A lot of us aren't told that or to do that, nor do we really listen. No fault of your own, but that's where it begins, because you didn't get here overnight. This didn't happen, yesterday. You didn't go eat like Burger King last week and then suddenly get a disease. It just, there are things that come together that converge, and like a bucket of water fills up and then you get to the brim and then it spills over. And then you have this full blown manifestation of autoimmunity. And so, but the antibodies in the blood were there years and years and years before you got the diagnosis, but you just get diagnosed in stage 3, which that's something that's important to understand, because a lot of people, I think with MS even, they have antibodies and they don't know it. But then as they move down the path and they get worse and worse, then they do the spinal tap and all these things and they find the lesions, whatever. And then it's already at that point where, okay, now we do something about it. But yes, there was a whole, again, it's hard to say this, because we could have done something earlier on if we had known. But this is why it's so important to kind of take matters in your own hand a little bit and start checking antibodies. And unfortunately, this is not something that's taught, I think, and spoken about a lot. But if we have this awareness, we can start to consider this for people in our family or friends who we think might be on the spectrum, and hope that they can catch us early. Because once you catch it early on, you've a greater chance of keeping it at bay and not even having a full-blown disease, So I know I'm not even answering your question, but that's the first step for me, is to explore the history, because that's where you find a lot of the insight, a lot of the root issues of why you got here. It's not a surprise to me at all, because I talk to many women who will say to me, well, I went through a divorce and I was sexually abused at 12 years old. And then I lost my job at 25 years old. And then I moved and I, crossed, 3 time zones over the past of a week. And my diet's like this. And, I don't need to hear much else. I can tell that's enough for why you're here. Yes, there's more to it, but that's enough in my mind. And it makes perfect sense when you see how all that fits into the autoimmune puzzle.
So what I'm hearing you saying that the emotional part plays a big role in having an active autoimmune.
Stress and emotions and trauma, whatever you want to call it, it's all part of the same bucket. And so that's the one area that I spend most of my time in, and because of how under-recognized it is. Not to say that there aren't people that are working on it or addressing it, but it does not get enough attention. And then how you address it is a different story. And that's the other problem too, because a lot of people will say to me, I've done this stuff, I dealt with my trauma, but have you though? And not to patronize you or anything, but like, that's sort of what happens. And they don't realize they're still dealing with stuff. And so it's complicated. So it's like awareness of it, and then how you do it and how you personally address it so that it actually helps you in a way that's unique to you is really the most important thing to consider. But yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Okay, so I know that a lot of people, once diagnosed with autoimmune disease, and really I noticed that it happens with most autoimmune conditions, they go directly to supplements, all types of supplements, and thinking that that's what's going to save the body. And I know that you have experience and knowledge about supplements, and I'd love to hear your opinion about that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's kind of what I was mentioning before. It's very attractive to a lot of people to go for the quick fix sort of thing, because that's kind of how we're being things are being marketed towards us. And we think that, I mean, we can take the supplement or do this and it's going to fix everything and it'll help maybe. I mean, one of the things that actually came up the other day with a client of mine was I used to believe that taking something would just suddenly cause immediate change in my symptoms. And if you go into this with an expectation that taking this, antioxidant, taking this curcumin or this, glutathione is going to solve your problems and stop inflammation, you're probably going to be disappointed because there's so much involved. I mean, yes, there are times where that stuff does help and you notice it, but maybe it's working and you don't see any difference. And that's a different thing. And that's about trust, not disregarding it as this was a waste of time, didn't work, but maybe it actually doesn't do anything either. Because there's so many other elements and factors of this disease that have to be accounted for. And if you have a lot of triggers that are perpetuating the autoimmune attack, you can take all the curcumin and resveratrol, whatever you want, and that may not do anything. So I'm not saying don't do supplements, but what happens is a lot of people over rely on it, they over depend on it, and their cabinets are loaded with stuff. I've got clients who come to me and they're like, I've taken 25, 30 things. And then my goal is to help them get down to like half that at least, because a lot of it is nonsense they don't need. It's extra noise and it's expensive. And then you get stressed out about the timing of the supplements and when to do it and when to take it with food, away with medication. It's this whole thing. And I'm thinking, do you think that stress from just talking about supplements and having your life revolve around that, do you think that's supporting your disease? No. So it's kind of counterproductive in my mind. So it's about finding the most appropriate things that are going to support your disease. For sure, that's important. But we need to be careful with what we're doing because it may just set us backwards. Okay, so again, context matters, of course. What you're doing and why is what matters. But when people take things blindly because their doctor gives it to them and they don't know why and they can't explain it to them, that's where I have an issue with it. And that's what happens a lot.
I think you brought up such a great point right now, because I think it shows up in many ways in the healing journey of different people. When we think that, we found a solution and we found something that we believe is going to work for our healing process. And then we become so rigid about it that it's actually, at this point, show up as a new stressor in our lives. Yeah, that actually affects the disease, which I guess comes back to everything, his mindset and, the meaning we give and how we approach everything in our life, which connect to what you just said. You talked about stress. You talked about trauma. Mm-hmm. Would you talk more into, the way I'm hearing you saying it is the trauma happened in the past and it affected physically our body. But besides that, it's also showing up in our day-to-day life.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Can you talk a little bit more into that?
Yeah. Well, there's two things to consider here, because the past stress and trauma, people will say to me first off that I don't have any trauma. I had a great childhood. My parents were really nice. I got good grades. They, congratulated me, and I went to school and did this, and I had great friends. Great. Awesome. It's awesome. But what I'm trying to say is that this is all really relative to you, and everyone goes through something. It's pretty much inevitable, but now or then. But trauma is relative in the sense that, in Greek, trauma means pain to the mind, body, or spirit. So what does that look like? And so consciously, you may not look at it this way, and you might think that you have any sort of stress or trauma in your life, but when you really sit with it enough, you can find things. And I know this because I did it for myself, and I realized, okay, there was some trauma in my life that I didn't realize was there. And yeah, it affected me to some degree, and I didn't realize it. It didn't cause an autoimmune disease for me. I don't have that, but that's my point. So just recognizing that as a possibility is the first thing, because then we can start to realize, okay, maybe that shifted my chemistry, my emotions, my behaviors, right? Because your beliefs and perceptions are hinged from that. And now you're a people pleaser, you're a perfectionist, you're a workaholic, you're overcommitting, you're over delivering, you're a caregiver, you're taking care of everybody. Taking care of everybody else but yourself, and you don't know why. So this is kind of what I mean. So there's that issue. And then there's the stuff with, present stress and how you're living your life with kids, domestic life, job stress, the pandemic, whatever, politics. So all that right now. And that's the big thing right now, because of how that's kind of adding fuel to the fire for a lot of people with a history of stress. And that's the thing, because once you've already been through a stressful moment or series of events that were very stressful in your past, you've shifted the immune system in a certain way, the nervous system in a certain way, your stress response is really amplified. And then what happens is that you get confronted with another stress today, and it really just adds fuel to the fire. And that's what keeps people stuck in the cycle where it's hard to get out of. And you can't heal a disease, an autoimmune disease, in that way. It's impossible, right? How can inflammation doesn't slow down? So this is everything to do with, how the mind connects to the body. And it's not some woo-woo stuff. It is legit science, psychoneuroimmunology. The mind affects the nervous system, which affects the immune system and the hormones. So it's all one big interconnected web. So that's the context. And so it's complicated, but that's sort of the gist of it.
Got it. How would you say specifically for people that are living with multiple sclerosis, would all of everything you just shared affect directly like daily symptoms that people live with and flare-ups that show up every now and then?
Yeah, for one thing, it's very, very individualized, right? So some people can, what I found is that some people can live their life and go through some stressful moments and be okay, not experience a flare up or anything like that. But we know that some people do, and they really feel that. Okay. And there's even research on this that shows this, which doesn't surprise me, because we know that that's what stress does. It can just aggravate an immune response and cause a flare up. But I know from research that they've even showed how people with MS who have a history of physical or sexual abuse have higher relapse rates than people who don't. Okay, so there's that whole notion, which makes sense based on what I've mentioned briefly about how the body is already perceiving a stress, lives with this stress, and you might have moved on in your brain, but your body has not. It lives there, right? So that's orchestrating and programming your body and your nervous system. So that's what happens, and that's why I think, coming back to going through a stressful moment in your life today, that can re-trigger, right, the issue going on with the inflammation. And then so It's both. It's not just the past, it's the present too. But when you understand like how it happens and why, I mean, really the bottom line is this, and I don't want to get super deep in this, but if you want to understand why this happens, it's because of stress hormones like cortisol. If you know, people know what that is usually. And cortisol is anti-inflammatory. It stops inflammation, right? It slows it down. Cortisone, your doctor may prescribe that, right? But what happens is that with long-term stressors, even if they're very small, they kind of aggregate. And especially if you've been exposed to many low-grade stressors, it does the opposite actually. And your immune system starts to become unresponsive to the anti-inflammatory effects of cortisol. So what it does is does the opposite. It actually perpetuates and amplifies inflammation. And so that's what the research probably is suggesting, is because people who go through trauma, they live with that stress, and they've had, and you can even see this, cortisol levels will change throughout the lifetime, but they will actually be really high or really low. People with PTSD often have really low cortisol levels. A lot of people who are sexually abused have high. I've seen it in either direction with labs, with clients of mine I've worked with, and the research will say the same thing. So it is a real thing. And cortisol has a big impact on regulating the immune system. So hopefully you can see just by that it's hard to control and stop an autoimmune response when you have wonky hormones. And so you can do all the things to slow down, take some adaptogens. Again, back to supplements, you can take adaptogens and ashwagandha and all these things to balance your cortisol levels, but it's really up here where it begins. And that's where the root issue is. So
yeah.
Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, totally. And we're talking a lot about the past. So I assume that a lot of our listeners would think something like, okay, so I do have stress that was caused in the past. I did have some trauma as a child. Now what? I mean, I want to heal myself. I cannot change the past. Yeah. What is possible here?
Yeah. And that's a really hard question to answer, because there's a lot of things, a lot of modalities, a lot of techniques, a lot of tools that we can use for this. And there's no right or wrong way. That's the first thing I want to say. But some people may have tried a lot, and that's the thing too. And they might have said, well, I've done EMDR, I did tapping, I did Reiki, I did hypnotherapy, I did polyvagal. And that's great. It can be helpful. It may not be. I've seen both. And so there is that sort of discussion about, well, what's best for you? And we don't know. It's a little bit of experimentation, actually. And that's what is going to have to happen, unfortunately, right? But it could work very well for you. But the thing to keep in mind is that what I'm trying to help people do is integrate their own consciousness and awareness, because that's the part that's been missed. And when you don't do that, then it's hard for you to work with pain and trauma. It's my biggest gripe with a lot of therapies out there. And again, they're not wrong. It's not say that you can't do these things. It's just that they have the intention of, like, we got to pull the trauma out of you. A lot of people tell me this, and I see this, like, we got to pull the trauma out of you. It's not supposed to be there. You do the session a couple times maybe, and then you're done, move on. But what did Einstein say? He said, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. So if your consciousness didn't change, then why would you expect your trauma to change? Right? The things that got you here, right? That consciousness has to change in order for you to heal. So if you're just trying to pull it out of you and get rid of it, well, your patterns and your behaviors and the self-limiting beliefs and the emotions that are really deep down there, the shame, the unworthiness, the fear, the anger, the resentment, whatever, that's all still there potentially. And then it'll come back, and you're going to have episodes or patterns that are self-sabotaging and self-defeating maybe. And, that's what happens. So you got to integrate your own consciousness and awareness. And that's a big discussion, but that's the thing that I'm helping people do, because that's what most are not doing. And when you do it and people really tap into that space and they practice with it and the tools we give them, then, I mean, it's a total game changer. But that's kind of my take on it.
So you're saying it's true that we can't change the past, but by working on our mindset in the present moment, our consciousness, our awareness, that's where we have the control in a way. That's what we can work on. And it can actually change how our mind is even experiencing the past trauma at this point. That's basically like the cycle.
It's all about how it's all about how you relate to it. So, what you do and what happened and what you do is one thing, but how you relate to it and why is you people have heard this. It's not about what's happening. It's how you relate to it. It's how you respond to it. Right. Things are out of our control right now in this country, things that we don't like. It's not about changing that. Maybe it's about just changing how we respond to it, because if you want to have happiness and joy and peace and healing, it's about your response. It's not about changing the circumstances of life so much. Yeah, we can try to do that, and we should, depending on what is in our power and our control. But if nothing else, it's in our mind and how we choose to react to it. And that's important, because that alone is what people have a hard time dealing with. And when they don't, it creates more self-inflicted suffering. And I can tell you from experience that's what fucking disease and autoimmunity is, because they're not shifting that. And it's just a technique. It's a practice. You have to get good at it, and it takes time. But I can tell you that over many months of practice and working with this, you can change, and you will. But you have to have the intention of wanting to do that.
And I'll add and believe that it's possible.
And believe it's possible, right? Yeah, exactly.
So, could you share with the listeners maybe some ideas or some practices they can start doing alone, in their lives to start creating the shift towards healing?
The first, and again, we could talk about, the interventions and things, the testing, the food, the diet, the supplements that you could do for MS and those things. But here's what I'll say, even before that discussion even happens with MS or any disease I'm working with in a client, it's still going to come back to the biography and say, well, tell me your story. How did you get here? Okay. People don't even realize that they have a story that explains why they're sick. Okay. So here's a good exercise. And I have this in my book. It's not a book that's relative to this, but it's called The Flexible Dieting Disaster, if you want to know, on Amazon. But you can see it, and that there's a timeline I drew as an example that basically is saying, all right, you're born here, here you are today, and I want you to draw out and map out, to the best of your ability, all the major events that happened in your life that you can remember. Like, I had a motor vehicle accident, my grandmother died, I lost my job, I traveled to a different country, and I was robbed. I was sexually abused at this age, whatever that is. Okay. Then you want to figure out, okay, where did I have symptoms? When did they start developing? Was it, when did I first experience migraines? When did I first start experiencing gut symptoms, or, brain fog or pain, whatever that is. Okay. And then, if you can, you don't have to do this, but another helpful thing is thinking about, are there any sort of patterns or behaviors of mine that, and this may not be easy because you need to know what those are, but I mentioned it before, that patterns that are not serving you, that maybe just be a reflex to those situations, whether it's binge eating, anorexia, over-exercising, taking care of others, like to an extreme amount, being a workaholic, people-pleasing, addiction, drugs, alcohol, whatever, materialism, OCD, I don't know. So that's what I mean. And to the best of your ability, just try to see the connection, to see if there's anything that started to surface right around when an event like that happened. Not to say that it's all going to happen like that. This event happened the next day, this happens. It's usually some time has to go by a little bit, but people tell me oftentimes, oh yeah, I went through this divorce. All of a sudden my disease got exponentially worse 2 weeks later. It's not by accident. So the point being, this can explain why we're here, because it's not just about toxins and infections. Yes, those are all real things. No one's denying that. I could talk way about that too, But this sort of stuff with our past and our experiences, this is what I find for a lot of people, they can explain why they're here. No, for sure. There definitely could be people who have a clean past. They really have nothing there. Then good. But it doesn't hurt to go through that process, I think. So all I'm saying is we can start to listen and see if there's anything there. And I think that's a really good first step, because most I find are not doing that.
Yeah, in the beginning, the first steps of just like raising the awareness of creating the connection between your current common behaviors, let's say, to past events could be something that all of you that are listening right now can start trying, start making the connections alone and dig into that. And there are a lot of people, Justin here is doing that, a lot of other people that can support in this type of work, because it became, unfortunately, very common. Mm-hmm. And especially, I mean, I personally think that, especially with the way, humanity is going, there's more comparisons and social media, and there's just more and more and more stressors. Everybody want to have more, everybody feel like they have less, even if they don't. Mm-hmm. The stress and the connection to the past, I think this is part of the reason why, unfortunately, the number of, autoimmune diseases is rising. So I'm really glad that you came and share your experience, share your knowledge. You also prepared a special gift for all the listeners from you, right? Yeah,
I did. So I recorded a quick training video on MS and root triggers, I guess, if you will. I kind of go a little bit in the nerdy side with science, but I think you'll be able to understand it. But it has nothing to do with this. It has more to do with the other aspect of this that we didn't talk about. So I think you'll enjoy it, but that will maybe shed a light on some other evidence-based root issues we know with lifestyle that can be something you're dealing with that is triggering MS. So I hope you enjoy it.
Wonderful. Do you want to talk a little bit about this right now and share with those who'll see it later?
Oh yeah. I mean, really the gist of it is that I'm talking about diagnostic testing, which you probably mostly know about, but antibodies and how to integrate that, because it's not what most doctors are using. Infections, a lot of the most common infections, the ones we know that are in the data to be implicated in MS, like Epstein-Barr virus for one. And then we're talking about the immune system and kind of just giving you an understanding a little bit about what's happening, because it's complicated. We don't have it all figured out, but I think the educational component of this is really what's missed a lot. And so, you want to know as much as you can, but as far as just understanding what is the legitimacy of this and knowing that you have, there's more for you to explore potentially. And that's the whole idea, because a lot of people don't know that there are real issues, and this is a lifestyle driven disease. It's not, by the way, so just to prove it to you, you have two twins. Okay. They have the genes for MS. The chances of, basically the chances of twins getting disease is about 20 to 30%. Okay. Meaning one can get it and it's because of lifestyle, and one may not. So so genes are not the reason. And that's the whole point, because it's not just with MS, with autoimmune as a whole. It's a lifestyle driven disease. Yes, you have genes that can predispose you, but we know that if you have two twins, they have the same set of genes, there's one of them can get MS and one of them will not, because of how they live the lifestyle. And whether it's because you know what you're doing or you don't, that's not the point, but just understanding that this is something that you can control. And yes, conventional medicine and immunosuppressants and all those things are important, but you got to integrate this if you want to have the best success.
So if lifestyle is causing it, lifestyle could help coming back to the life that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Justin. Before we finish, anything else you want to share? Any tips, any advice?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say is if you want to learn more about this stuff and what I do with this discussion about stress and trauma in my body and how that relates to autoimmunity, It definitely will apply to you because it's not just limited to the MS, but really anybody with autoimmune disease. And if you're dealing with stress and trauma, especially. But you can find me on Instagram. I talk about this every day. It's at Justin Janoska, Justin Janoska. And then our website is the autoimmunerevolution.com. You can find a lot of resources there and see if there's anything that sticks out for you. That's a bit. That's about it, though.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time you came and share with us from your knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.